Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some more Esoterica. We are diving back into the works of Rudolf Steiner. This is Theosophy. We are up to Chapter 3, The Three Worlds. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. But before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there are several playlists that will be linked in the corner up here and in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and where I stand and why I stand there. I try to be clear as we go through, but sometimes I fail at that, and so the playlists make it a lot easier to understand where I am coming from. With that being said, we are going to dive in and begin to discuss the soul world. Our study of man has shown that he belongs to three worlds. From the world of physical corporality are taken the materials and forces building up his body. He has knowledge of this world through the perceptions of his external physical senses. Anyone trusting to these senses alone and developing his perceptive abilities alone can gain for himself no enlightenment concerning the other two worlds, the soul and the spiritual. A man's ability to convince himself of the reality of a thing, or a being, depends on whether he has an organ of perception, a sense for it. It may, of course, easily lead to misunderstandings if one call the higher organs of perception spiritual senses, as is done here. For in speaking of senses, one involuntarily connects with them the thought physical. The physical world is in fact designated the sensible, in contradistinction to the spiritual. In order to avoid this misunderstanding, one must take into account that higher senses are spoken of here only in a comparative or metaphorical sense. As the physical senses perceive the physical world, the soul and spiritual senses perceive the soul and spiritual worlds. The expression sense will be used as meaning simply organ of perception. Man would have no knowledge of light and color had he not an eye able to sense light. He would know nothing of sound had he not an ear able to sense sound. In this connection, the German philosopher Lotze rightly says, without a light-sensing eye and a sound-sensing ear, the whole world would be dark and silent. There would be in it just as little light or sound as there could be toothache without the pain-feeling nerve of the tooth. In order to see what is said here in the right light, one need only think how entirely different the world must reveal itself to man on the one hand, and on the other to the lower forms of animal life that have only a kind of touch sense or sense of feeling spread over the whole surface of their bodies. Light, color, and sound certainly cannot exist for them in the same way as for beings gifted with ears and eyes. The vibrations which the firing of a gun causes may have an effect on them also if they reach them. But in order that these vibrations of the air should present themselves as a report, an ear is necessary, and an eye is necessary in order that certain processes in the fine matter that one calls ether should reveal themselves as light and color. Man knows something about a being or thing only because through one of its organs he receives its effects. This relationship of man with the world of realities is excellently brought out by Goethe when he says, "It is really in vain that we try to express the nature of a thing. We become aware of effects, and a complete history of them would indeed embrace the nature of that thing. We endeavor in vain to describe the character of a man, but if instead we systemically correlate his actions and deeds, a picture of his character will present itself to us. Colors are the actions of light, actions in suffering. Colors and light are indeed linked in closest relationship, but we must think of them both as belonging to the whole of nature. For through them the whole of nature is engaged in revealing herself to the sense of the eye especially. In like manner, nature reveals herself to another sense. Nature thus speaks downward to other senses, to known, misunderstood, unknown senses. She thus speaks with herself and to us through 1,000 phenomena. To the attentive, she is nowhere either dead or silent. It would not be correct were one to interpret the saying of Goethe's as though by it the possibility of knowing the essential nature of a thing were being denied. Goethe does not mean that one perceives only the effects of a thing and that the being hides itself behind them. He means rather that one should not speak at all of a hidden being. The being is not behind its revelation. It comes, on the contrary, into view through the revelation. But this being is, in many respects, so rich that it can reveal itself to other senses in yet other forms. That which reveals itself belongs to the being only, on account of the limitations of the senses. It is not the whole being. This point of view of Goethe's is entirely the theosophical one. As in the body, eye and ear develop into organs of perception, into senses for corporal occurrences, so is man able to develop in himself soul and spiritual organs of perception, through which the soul and spiritual worlds will be open to him. For those who have not such higher senses, these worlds are dead and silent. Just as for a being without eyes and ears, the corporal world is dark and silent. It is true that the relation of man to these higher senses is rather different from his relations to the corporal senses. It is good that Mother Nature, who sees to it as a rule that these latter are developed in him, they come into existence without his help, but on the development of his higher senses he must work himself. If he wishes to perceive the soul and spirit worlds, he must develop soul and spirit, as nature has developed his body, so that he might perceive the corporal world around him and guide himself in it. Such a development of the higher organs, not yet developed for us by nature herself, is not unnatural. For in the higher sense, all that man accomplishes belongs also to nature. I'm going to pause here, and we're going to say really quick that the senses are there already. You merely have been limited from finding them. You have been convinced that they will condemn you to hell. That is the doctrine of several of the control systems. That if you use the higher senses, then you're a witch, and you need to be thrown into a river, tied to a chair, or tied to a stake and lit on fire. That is literally what has happened for the last 2 millennia, at least. But those senses are there. You can use them. You can unlock them. It takes intentionality. It takes you going through the process. There is prayer involved. There is meditation involved, and there is fasting involved. If you are not doing all 3 of those steps, you will not unlock the doors. But you can unlock the doors. The same doors that people are going around trying to unlock with various chemicals, ayahuasca, psilocybin, DMT, any of those things, unlock doors. They unlock the doors to these organs that are already a part of you. But you can unlock all the doors without any of the chemicals. That is a possibility that you can do, but it takes discipline. If you are unlocking those particular doors with the chemicals, you're doing it wrong. Because you are not prepared. You are not mentally prepared. You are not physically prepared. And you are definitely not spiritually prepared for the realities on the other side of that door if you are not practicing prayer, fasting, and meditation. And if you are unlocking those doors through the means of chemicals, you are almost certainly doing it wrong. Only he who wishes to maintain that man should remain standing at the stage at which he left the hand of nature could call the development of the higher senses unnatural. By him, the significance of these organs is misunderstood, as indicated in the quotation from Goethe. Such a one might just as well oppose all education of man, for it also develops further the work of nature, and he would have to oppose especially operations upon those born blind. For almost the same thing happens to him who awakens his higher senses in himself as to the person born blind and operated on. That is absolutely true. It is an entirely different world when you can look through spiritual eyes. When you can see somebody's aura, it will let you know things about them that you did not know prior. I guarantee it. The world appears to him with new qualities, events, and facts, of which the physical senses reveal nothing to him. It is clear to him that through these higher organs he adds nothing arbitrarily to the reality, but that without them the essential part of his reality would have remained hidden from him. The soul and spirit worlds are nothing alongside or outside the physical world. They are not separated in space from it. Just as for persons born blind and operated on, the previously dark world rays out lights and colors. So the things which previously were only corporal phenomena reveal their soul and spirit qualities to him who is soul and spirit awakened. In addition to this, however, this world then becomes filled with still other occurrences and beings that remain completely unknown to him, whose soul and spirit senses are not awakened. The development of the soul and spirit senses will be spoken of in a more detailed way further in this book. Here, these are higher worlds themselves will be described. Anyone who denies the existence of these worlds says nothing more than he has not yet developed his higher organs. This is still the case with the greater part of mankind at the present stage of the world's evolution. That is true. But the evolution of man is not terminated at any one stage. It must always progress. What will be here called the soul world is called in current theosophical literature the astral. The spirit world is called in it the mental. I don't know that there is that much of a difference between those two particular worlds. I'm going to have to see how their terminology lines out, but I have done things that most people haven't, right? Some people have. I don't claim to have exclusivity on anything. People have found different keys than the ones that I use, but the keys that I use I know work. I have been in at least the astral part. I don't know about the rest, but we'll see how the terminology falls out. One often involuntarily pictures the higher organs as too similar to the physical ones. One should understand quite clearly that in these organs, one has to do with spiritual or soul formations. One ought not to expect, therefore, that what one perceives in the higher worlds is only a vaporous, rarefied matter. So long as one expects something of this kind, one can come to no clear idea as to what it is exactly meant by higher worlds. For many persons, it would not be at all as difficult as it actually is to know something about these higher worlds, the elementary part. That is to say, if they did not form the idea that what they are to see is again merely physical matter, rarefied. Because they presuppose something of this kind, as a rule, they, as a rule, do not at all wish to acknowledge the reality of that which is the essential part. They look upon it as unreal, refuse to acknowledge it as something that satisfies them, and so on. The higher stages of spiritual development are certainly not easily accessible, but the lower, and that is already a great deal, would not be at all so difficult to reach if people would, from the first, free themselves from the prejudice which consists in picturing to themselves the soul and spiritual merely as a finer physical. It is different. It is. There is significant differences. Just as we do not wholly know a man when we have formed a picture of his physical exterior only, so also we do not know the world around us if we only know in it what the physical senses reveal to us. And just as a photograph becomes intelligible and living to us when we have become so intimately acquainted with the person photographed as to know his soul, so we can really understand the corporal world only if we learn to know its soul and spiritual basis. For this reason, it is advisable to speak here first about the higher, the soul and spirit worlds, and only then to judge of the physical from the theosophical standpoint. Certain difficulties are met with at this present stage of civilization by anyone speaking about the higher worlds. That is still true 100 years later. For this age is great above all things in the knowledge and conquest of the physical world. Our words have, in fact, received their stamp and significance through being applied to this physical world. Nevertheless, we have to make use of these current words so as to form a link with something known. This opens the door to many misunderstandings on the part of those who wish to trust their external senses only. Much also can be expressed and indicated only by means of similes and resemblances. This must be so, for such similes are a means by which a man is at first directed to these higher worlds, and through which his own ascent into them is furthered. This will become evident in a later chapter, in which the development of the soul and spiritual organs of perception will be spoken of. To begin with, one must gain knowledge of the higher worlds by means of similes. Only then is man ready to acquire for himself the power to see into them. As a matter of forces which compose and govern our stomach, our heart, our brain, our lungs, etc., come from the physical world. No. So do our soul qualities. Our impulses, desires, feelings, passions, wishes, sensations, etc. come from the soul world. All right, so the compose, yes. The govern, no. Right? The matter and forces which compose is the corporeal. That is the carbon that makes up the structure. That is the phosphorus that allows it to bend. That is the different parts that play each their own small little part as they go through you. But the part that governs your stomach, your heart, your brain, and lungs is not the physical. It is the spirit. It is the becoming. The spirit is the part that takes your food and turns it into fuel. It is the part that takes the air you breathe and disperses it to the fingertips and the toes. It is the part that keeps your heart bumping when you're asleep. It is the part that keeps you breathing when you have no sensation whatsoever. That is the spirit. That is not the physical. I understand that that is a hard distinction to make, and I understand how they got that wrong here, but it is absolutely wrong here. The soul of the human being is a member of this world, just as his body is part of the physical world of bodies. Should one wish to begin by pointing out a difference between the corporal and soul worlds, one would say that the latter is, in all objects and entities, much finer, much more mobile and plastic than the former. But it must be kept clearly in mind that on entering the soul world, one enters a world entirely different from the physical. If, therefore, coarser and finer be spoken of in this respect, readers must be fully aware that one suggests, by means of a comparison, what is fundamentally different. It is the same with all that is said about the soul world in words borrowed from the world of physical corporality. Taking this into account, one can say that the formations and beings of the soul world consist in the same way of soul materials, and are directed in the same way by soul forces, as in the case of the physical world with physical materials and physical forces. Just as spatial extension and spatial movement are peculiar to corporal formations, so are excitability and impelling desire peculiar to the things and beings of the soul world. For this reason, one describes the soul world as the world of desires or wishes, or as the world of longing. These expressions are borrowed from the human soul world. One must, therefore, hold clearly in view that the things in those parts of the soul world which lie outside of the human soul are just as different from the soul forces within it as the physical matter and forces of the external, corporal world are different from the parts which compose the physical human body. Impulse, wish, longing are named for the material of the soul world. To this matter, and that I do kind of agree with, right? The soul is the part that makes the decisions, right? The body is the meat suit. The soul is the individualized piece of God that is given to you to make your decisions in the corporeal, right? Now, there is a soul world external from you, but that is different from the spirit, right? The spirit is the part that makes it happen. It is kind of outside of you, but you have access to it. Whereas this is absolutely intrinsic to you, and this is kind of in between, right? The part here can see the other parts similar to it outside there. The reality of life outside of you looks a little bit different through the third eye, right? It is much more fractured. It is much more kaleidoscopical, right? It is a lot of swirling and a lot of whirling and a lot of things like that. When you take those chemicals and unlock those doors and there is the various hallucinations that happen, that is the soul world that you're getting access to, not the spirit world. That is different. But impulse, wish, longing, those are things that the soul does. That is the part that makes the decisions. They do have impulses. It does have wishes and longings. That is part of the soul world. So I agree with that part. To this matter, theosophical literature gives the name of astral, and that is, yeah. If one wishes to refer specifically to the forces of the soul world, one speaks in theosophy of karma. But it must not be forgotten that the distinction between matter and force cannot be as sharply drawn as in the physical world. An instinct, an impulse, can be called force just as well as matter. No. Matter is the structure. It is the part that is solid. That is matter. Force is the application of spirit. It is the direction and the intention to do something. And like if I'm pushing against something, that is not matter. It is force, right? It is the intention in motion. That is the spirit part. On him who obtains a view of the soul world for the first time, the differences between it and the physical have a bewildering effect. That is true. But that is also the case when a previously inactive physical sense is being opened. The man, born blind, when operated upon, has first to learn to guide himself through the world which he has previously known only by the means of sense of touch. Such a one, for example, sees the objects at first in his own eyes. Then he sees them outside himself, but at first they appear to him as if painted on a flat surface. Only gradually does he grasp perspective and the spatial distance between things. In the soul world, entirely different laws prevail from those in the physical. Now, there are many soul formations bound to those of the other worlds. The soul of man, for instance, is bound to the human body and to the human spirit. The occurrences one can observe in it are therefore influenced at the same time by the bodily and spiritual worlds. One has to take this into account in observing the soul world, and one must take care not to ascribe to a law of the soul world occurrences due to the influence of another world. When, for example, a man sends out a wish, it is produced by a thought, a conception of the spirit whose laws it accordingly follows. One can formulate the laws of the physical world while ignoring, for example, the influence of a man on its occurrences, and the same thing is possible with regard to the soul world. An important difference between soul and physical occurrences can be expressed by saying that the interaction in the former is much more inward than the latter. In physical space there reigns, for example, the law of impact. When an ivory ball strikes another which is at rest, the latter moves in a direction which can be calculated from the motion and elasticity of the first. In the soul space, the interaction of two forms which meet depends on their inner qualities. If they are in infinity, they mutually interpenetrate each other and, as it were, grow together. They repel each other if their beings conflict. In physical space there are, for example, definite laws of vision. One sees distant objects perspectively diminishing. When one looks down an avenue, the distant trees appear, according to the laws of perspective, to stand at shorter distances from each other than the near ones. In the soul space, on the contrary, all objects, near and far, appear to the clairvoyant at those distances from each other which are due to their inner nature. This is naturally a source of the most varied mistakes for those who enter the soul world and wish to become at home there by the help of the rules which they bring with them from the physical world. One of the first things that a man must do in order to make his way about the soul world is to realize that one distinguishes the various kinds of its forms in a similar manner to that in which one distinguishes solid, liquid, air, or gaseous bodies in the physical world. Air and gaseous would be the same thing. In order to be able to do that, it is necessary to know that the two basic forces, which are the most important in it, they may be called sympathy and antipathy. The order to which a soul formation belongs is decided by the manner in which these basic forces work in it. The force with which one's soul formation attracts others, seeks to fuse with them, to make its affinity with them effectual, must be designated as sympathy. Antipathy, on the other hand, is the force with which the soul formations repel, exclude each other in the soul world, with which they assert their separate identity. The part played in the soul world by a soul formation depends on the proportions in which these basic forces are present in it. One has to distinguish, in the first place, between three kinds of soul formations, according to the manner in which sympathy and antipathy work in them. These kinds differ from each other in that sympathy and antipathy have in them definitely fixed mutual relationships. In all three, both basic forces are present. Let us take, to begin with, a formation of the first kind. It attracts other formations in its neighborhood by means of the sympathy ruling in it. But besides this sympathy, there is at the same time present in it antipathy, through which it repels certain things in its surroundings. From the outside, such a formation appears to be endowed with the forces of antipathy only. This, however, is not the case. There is sympathy and antipathy in it, but the latter predominates. It has the upper hand over the former. Such formations play a self-seeking role in the soul space. They repel much that is around them and lovingly attract but little to themselves. They therefore move through the soul space as unchangeable forms. The force of sympathy which is in them appears greedy. This greed appears at the same time insatiable, as if it could not be satisfied, because the predominating antipathy repels so much of what approaches that no satisfaction is possible. Here we have to do with what is described in theosophical literature as the lowest part of the astral world. Should one wish to compare this kind of soul formation with something in the physical world, one can say that it corresponds with the solid physical bodies. This region of soul matter may be called burning desire. The manner in which this burning desire is mingled in the souls of animals and men determines in them what one calls the lower sensual impulses, their dominating selfish instincts. The second kind of soul formations is that in which the two basic forces preserve a balance, in which, accordingly, antipathy and sympathy act with equal strength. They approach other formations with a certain neutrality and act on them as if related, but without especially attracting or repelling. They, as it were, erect no solid barrier between themselves and their surroundings. They constantly allow other formations and their surroundings to act on them. One can, therefore, compare them with the liquids of the physical world, and there is nothing of greed in the way in which such formations attract others to themselves. The activity, meant here, is in process. For example, when the human soul receives the sensation of a certain color. If I have the sensation of a red color, I receive, to begin with, a neural excitation from my surroundings. Only when there is added to this excitation pleasure in the red color does another soul activity come into play. That which affects the neutral excitation is the action of the soul formations standing in such mutual relationship that sympathy and antipathy preserve an equal balance. One will have to describe the soul matter which comes under observation here as perfectly plastic and flowing, not self-seeking like the first does and move around about the soul space, but in such a way that its being receives impressions from all directions, and that it shows itself to have an affinity with much that approaches it. An expression that may be used to designate it is flowing excitability. The third stage of soul formations is that in which sympathy has the upper hand over antipathy. Antipathy produces the self-seeking, self-assertion. This, however, retires in the face of the liking for the things in the surroundings. Let us picture such a formation within the soul space. It appears as the center point of an attracting sphere which spreads over the objects in its surroundings. Such formations one must designate in a special sense as wish substance. This designation appears to be the right one because the attraction so acts, even through the existing antipathy, as to bring the attracted objects within the soul's formation's own sphere. The sympathy thus receives a tone of selfishness. This wish substance may be likened to the air or gaseous bodies of the physical world. As a gas strives to expand on all sides, so does the wish substance spread itself out in all directions. Higher grades of soul substance render themselves distinguishable by the fact that in them one of the basic forces, namely antipathy, retires completely, and sympathy alone shows itself as the one really effective. Now this is able to make its power felt within the parts of the soul formation itself. That is one of the 8 laws of creation, right? That what he's describing here is one of the 8 laws of creation. It is the law of response. Like I have them up here, but it's the 3rd law. The 8 laws of creation will definitely be it's in the playlist if I forget to link the actual video, but it is in there. And what this is saying is that like attracts like, basically, right? Positive and negative attract in magnetism, and that is true, but people tend to congregate around like-minded people. If you go into a naturally occurring market, shops will tend to congregate together in such a way that you can go from one to another, and it is similarly related, if not exactly the same store owned by different people. Now that can be artificially manipulated, but for the most part, that is how it works. Right? That's why marketplaces become a thing. That is why the Masons are a group. That is why people tend to congregate with like-minded people. It is because of the law of response. Like attracts like. And so if you are focused on the negative, which is what you're talking about with antipathy, right? The things that I don't want. If you are focused on those things, you are attracting those things. But if you are focused on the things of sympathy as opposed to antipathy, that is attracting the things that you do want. That is becoming like the thing that you want. And so you attract the like to you. If you are focused on the negative, you are attracting the like, which is negative. If you are focused on the positive, you are attracting the like, which is positive. Now this is able to make its power felt within the parts of the soul formation itself. These parts mutually attract each other. That force of sympathy within a soul formation comes to an expression in what it calls liking, and each lessening of this sympathy is disliking. Disliking is only a lessened liking, as cold is only a lessened warmth. Liking and disliking compose what lives in man as the world of emotions in the narrow sense of the word. Feeling is the life and activity of the soul within itself. What one calls the comfort of the soul depends on the way in which the feelings of liking and disliking, attraction and repulsion, interact with the soul. A still higher grade is occupied by those soul formations whose sympathy does not remain enclosed within the region of their own life. They differ from the 3 lower grades, as does in fact the 4th also, in that in them the force of sympathy has no antipathy, opposing it to overcome. It is only through these higher orders of soul substance that the manifold variety of soul formations can unite and form a common soul world. In cases where antipathy comes into play, the soul formation strives towards another thing for sake of its own life, and in order to strengthen and enrich itself by means of the other. Where antipathy is silent, the other thing is received as revelation, as information. This higher form of soul substance plays in the soul space a similar role to that played by light in the physical space. It causes a soul formation to suck it in, as it were, the being or essence of others for their sakes. One could also say to let itself be rayed upon them. Only by drawing upon these higher regions are the soul beings awakened to the true soul life. Their dull life in the darkness opens outward and begins itself to shine and ray out into the soul space. the sluggish, dull movements of the inner life, which wishes to shut itself off through the antipathy, when the substance of the lower regions are present, becomes force and mobility, which arises from within, and streaming pours itself outward. The flowing excitability of the second region is only effective when formations meet each other. Then, indeed, the one streams over into the other. But contact is here necessary. In the higher region there prevails a free outraying and outpouring. Rightly does one describe the essential nature of this region as an outraying, for the sympathy which is developed in such a way that one can use as symbol for it the expression taken from the action of light. The soul pines from the lack of the soul substances of the higher regions which give it life, as a plant degenerates in a dark cellar. Soul light, active soul force, and the true soul life, in the narrower sense, belong to these regions, and thence pour themselves out into the soul beings. One has therefore to distinguish between 3 lower and 3 higher regions of the soul world. These are linked by a fourth, so that there results the following division of the soul world. The region of burning desire, 1. 2. The region of flowing excitability, 3. The region of wishes, 4. The region of attraction and repulsion, 5. The region of soul light, 6. The region of active soul force, and 7. The region of active soul life. These can probably be overlaid on the 7 interior chakras. Through the first 3 regions of the soul formation receive their qualities according to the proportion of sympathy and antipathy in them. Through the 4th region, sympathy is prevailingly active within the soul formations themselves. Through the 3 highest, the power of sympathy becomes ever more and more free, illumined and quickening. The soul substances of this region waft through the soul space, awakening that which, if left to itself, would lose itself in its own separate existence. For the sake of clearness, it is here emphasized, though it should be superfluous, that these 7 divisions of the soul world do not represent regions separated from one another. Just as in the physical regions, solid, liquid, and air, or gaseous substances, interpenetrate, so do burning desire, flowing excitability, and the forces of the world of wishes on the soul world. And as in the physical world, warmth penetrates bodies and light illumines them, so it is the case in the soul world with desire and aversion. And with the soul light, something similar takes place with regard to the active soul force and the true soul life. And that's going to set up this part, and we're going to talk really quick. And because we are going to talk really quick, we're going to go ahead and put this in there. This is going to be a level of responsibility. If you are unaware of what a level of responsibility means, then you should definitely go back and check out the Infinite Integration playlist. Start at the beginning. I know it sounds self-serving, but I promise you I only make pennies per view. It is not a big deal monetarily, but it is a big deal for you. You are responsible for the level of knowledge which you attain, and you are about to attain another level of knowledge. We said that these 7 things, I'm going to go ahead and kick that back over for you, could possibly overlay. We're going to run through what these 7 internal and the 1 external is. And that's why this is a level of responsibility, because you are able to do something with this, and so you should be responsible for it. As for myself, I'm going to refer you once again to the 8 laws of creation, which will make the 3rd time that I am doing that in this video, which is my absolution, right? So you have 7 internal chakras. You have 1 external for a total of 8. You have access to all of them, but the 8th one you only really get once you have achieved balance within the 7. There is the base, which is at the very bottom. It is about the size of your fist. All of them are about the size of your fist. Some a little smaller, some a little bigger. They're a perfect circle where your fist is absolutely not going to be. But that's the rough size of it. It is spinning. It is energetically infused, and it moves. How it moves and how well it moves is entirely up to you, but as a general rule, they alternate in direction, right? So as far as I know, they all go in the same direction for everyone. I don't know of anyone where the base runs to the left-hand side. The base rotates clockwise. It is signified by red, and it is about survival. It is about the very being of humanity. It is attached to the energetic source, that is the grounding source, more than it is the receiving source. But you can receive and ground both through all of the chakras, but it is easier at the top and the bottom to manipulate the energies in the proper directions. This particular one can probably be overlaid with the burning desire or the excitability. I'm not sure that these are in the correct actions, right? Like they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 may not directly correlate. You may have to move them around. The next one moving up is the sacral. It is in charge of the reproductive activities. It is centered roughly about where you thrust if you were to squeeze your hips as if you were penetrating, right? This one again could be the burning desire. Sorry. It is signified by orange, and it spins counterclockwise. These alternate. So the base is going clockwise, the sacral is going counterclockwise. That is because this energy comes in and it moves like a snake up, and there's one that moves like a snake down. They move on the opposite sides of each other, right? So the one coming up is opposite of the other one. I look at those as black at the bottom and white at the top. You don't necessarily have to do that. Colors are not all that important. They just help you to understand and keep track of things. They do seem to be somewhat independent, right? There is that. But for me, most of the auras are clear, right? It is something that I keep in my mind that this is supposed to be orange, but it does not appear orange to me when I look at it. That could be something deficient in me. I am just getting full control over this one up here. The next one moving up is the stomach, right? It is the solar plexus. It is centered right about where your gut is, but if your ribs, right, you can see you have your sternum right here. That is where the heart is. But if you come down where it V's out and you put your fist right there in the middle, that's about where it's going to be. It's at the top end of your stomach, not really at the bottom end. But it is there, and it is rotating in a clockwise manner, and it is signified by the color yellow. It has to do with nourishing you. Imagine that. And it is about the things that you actively want in your life. The heart, right here. This one is about the size of your fist. It is green, and it rotates in a left-handed pattern. This is about the connection between the top and the bottom, right? The last three, the base, the solar plexus, and the sacral, are all the carnal side. That is lower half of the body. It is more in the grounding and the mothering side. Whereas above the heart, it gets more into the spiritual and the God side of things. The heart is your genuine desires of what you really want, and this is where the attraction and repulsion absolutely lie. What you do to connect the bottom and the top and project out into the divine is the part that attracts to you the like. Your throat is about the size of your fist. It is signified by blue. It rotates in a clockwise manner, and it is the part that expresses those desires. It is the part that creates the reality in which you live, right? The speaking aloud of your desires allows them to become part of your life by enveloping you in the toroid of your desire. Next up, we have the third eye, which most people think is right here in the forehead, but it is not really right there in the forehead. That is where you see the projection, though, and I can understand why people would get that messed up. But if you take and you put your finger right here between your eyes, and then you go back here, and where your skull comes down into a V, much like the one here in your chest, and you put your finger at the bottom of the V, and right here between your eyes, and you draw a line, and then you go just above the ears, like right here above the ears, right behind the temple, and you draw a line. Where those two lines intersect, you can do another one down like this, but where those two lines intersect is your pineal gland. That is your third eye. That is the part that you can direct energy into to awaken, and fluoride has absolutely nothing to do with it. But it acts like a kind of projector, and that is where you see forward into what you want your desires to be, right? So you're expressing them through here, and you're envisioning them through here, and you receive them up here. Now the third eye rotates in a left-handed manner. The crown chakra is about the size of your fist, and the crown and the base are both halfway in and halfway out of your body. So if you were to put your fist on like halfway in your skull and halfway out of your skull, that's where it would be. It is signified by violet. Indigo is the third eye. Violet is here at the top. It rotates in a clockwise manner, and it is where you receive the information from the penetrative masculine source, right? The destructive creative force. The grounding force is the nurturing, growing force. The top is the penetrative creative force. You can take the energy which is at the top and the energy which is at the bottom, and you can meld them. You can take them through the various steps into your heart and project them outwards. When you project them outwards, what you are doing is projecting them through your heart into your divine aura. Your divine aura surrounds you. It is not white and not black, but a perfect melding of the two. Not gray, but if you were to really look at this shirt, it's not gray. It is black and white. It is speckled. It appears gray because the black and the white are close together and your eyes kind of blur them. But it is black and it is white. They are separate. If you think about the checkerboard that the Masons like to stand on, it is a good way to look at that. It is projected outward from you. It begins at the palm of your hand, right where the bend is. Right? If your hand was completely gone, it would be at the wrist. It's not at your fingers, right? If you stick your hand out like this, it's here, not here. But it extends outward from that point to varying degrees, depending on your health in your spiritual stack and how far you are going. Now, it can extend a great distance if you are miscorrectly aligned. It's just not doing the right thing for you. It is attracting the like that you don't want. If you are properly aligned, you are attracting the like that you do want. It is very important to pray, fast, and meditate before you do any of these things. But if you can take the left-handed rotating ones, which is the sacral, the heart, and the third eye, and you can envision that which you want, you can create the generative exercise, and you can meld those, right, and project them out through the heart. That is how manifestation works. There's all kinds of people who will tell you all kinds of things about manifestation, but I can tell you about what I know in my own personal experience, and the melding of these three is pretty important. Now, I have a whole video, again, in the Infinite Integrations playlist that talks about the process of manifestation in more detail than this, but this is the gist of what I talk about in there. You can take that energy and direct it. Now, the ones that flow to the right, the top and the bottom are your receptors, right? You're receiving the penetrative, creative, and you're receiving the grounding, nurturing, and they move kind of like a snake around these chakras. That is why people look at it as the Kundalini or whatever. Now, most of the people who are dealing with the Kundalini are doing it wrong. I don't care if you don't like that. It is not a one-stage process. It is not just pulling up this one color from the bottom and making it come up like a snake to the top. If you do that, you've only done half the process. There is another source that comes down from the top. It is divine. Both of them are divine, but you are receiving the information. The next rotate to the right ones are kind of like amplifiers. They take the energy through your desire and amplify it into the actual thing, right? So you're receiving the instruction through your crown. You are projecting what you want through your third eye. And then you are amplifying that through your voice. You are receiving through your base. You are projecting your desire through the sacral, and you're amplifying that through your solar plexus. The melding happens in your heart, right? You have the lower half, you have the upper half, and they are melded into your heart and projected into your divine aura. Where you want to do that, if you're looking at your hand again, right? You want to project that in between here. You don't really want it here, and you don't want it out here at all. You want it about right here. You kind of want it right here in the middle-ish. You want to project clearly the thing that you do actively want, not the thing that you don't want. You don't want to be working with repulsion. You want to be working with attraction. You don't have to listen to me. You will almost certainly not. You will absolutely feel the repercussions if you choose not to listen. I don't know that I can make this process any clearer than that. If you have questions, however, leave them for me. I will answer them if I can. Maybe in a video, maybe in comments, but I will try to clarify this. It is extremely important that you follow the 8 laws of creation when you are doing this. Please do not try this without doing the prayer, fasting, and meditation. Do not try this until you have actually spent the time to master every single chakra. Manifestation is a real thing. You can immediately begin speaking the things that you want into your life. Do that. Not the things that you don't want, but the things that you want. Do that. But before you start trying to manipulate these energies, make sure that you are aligned correctly and in accordance with the 8 laws of creation at all times. Make sure that your motivation is correct. Make sure that your balance between your vices and virtues is correct, because if not, it is extremely easy to miss-shoot your target. A single degree of variation can make you miss the target. Ensure fully that you are in accordance with the 8 laws of creation, and I believe that makes 6 times that I have told you to check out that video. Please do so. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some different views than other people, and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relate those views, and while it is not intentional, I do not apologize for it at all. I am here to show what I know to be correct. I'm not here to attack those that I believe are wrong, right? They might be right in their way. I'm not going to try their way. I know mine works. Other people's keys may work for you, but these keys I am freely giving to you. I want everybody to be able to do this. I just want you to be able to do it safely, responsibly, and with the results that you actually want. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I am not a communist. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.